And is warming there going to be unprecedented? Good question. Well, this is from an inconvenient truth, an inconvenient collection of photographs that turned into a PowerPoint presentation. These photographs from Greenland illustrate the dramatic changes now happening on the ice there. Fine. Notice how carefully the words are chosen. The dramatic changes now happening on the ice. This is published a few years ago. This is a picture from 2005. Now, we could go to the scientific literature, we could go to the Cal Library or something like that, and we could find the temperature history from southern Greenland. The Danes left by a very nice network of temperatures, of thermometers, and you can see here from 1920 to about 1945 that the actual integrated warming is greater than it is now, and that couldn't be from greenhouse gases. So what was the situation like back then? Well, here's the dramatic changes on the ice then happening in 1950 before we put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is from the journal Arctic, volume 6 in 1953, river disappearing in 40-foot deep gorge. So you see the Greenland scenario was fed upon the fact that you melt the ice, turns into water, it goes underneath the ice and it lubricates it, and all the ice suddenly falls off of Greenland. Well, we were warmer for 4 decades in the early and mid-20th century. Did anybody hear about all the ice falling off of Greenland? Absolutely not. Why not? Because it didn't. And if it didn't do it with more warming than there was then, how is it going to do it now? Good question. And by the way, that leads me to another one of these things that, don't you know there is an island that has just appeared off of Greenland because the ice has melted? And it's called Warming Island. And it was, I know it's true. I read about it in the New York Times. Okay. January 16th, 2007. John Collins Rudolph. A peninsula, long thought to be a part of Greenland's mainland, turned out to be an island when a glacier retreated. The ominous implications are not lost on Dennis Schmidt, who says he hopes the island discovered in Greenland will become an international symbol of the effects on climate change. Mr. Schmidt, who speaks Inuit, has provisionally named it Unaqartog, the Warming Island. And there's a cult on Warming Island. You can look it up online and you get a tremendous number of hits for Warming Island. And so inquiring minds wanted to know about Warming Island. Here's satellite imagery from 1985. You see it's shaped like this. 3 fingers. I'm not disrespecting you in camouflage. That's the shape of Warming Island. And this is satellite image from 2002. You can see it's warmed up some, and the ice is getting a little narrow there. And by 2005, you can actually see that Warming Island is indeed an island. And it's been so for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. I'll tell you where Warming Island is. Here's a map. This is a place called Carlsbad Fjord. You see this? This is northeastern Greenland. This is flipped on its side. And there are the 3 fingers of Warming Island. Well, inquiring minds want to know, because you see there's a weather station in Angmasalik, which is only 50 miles away from Warming Island. And you can see it was warmer back here. There's the big warm summer of 2003. Now it's back around there. So we have an integrated warming here, which is clearly greater than it was back there. The New York Times, okay, what we're talking about here is fact-checking, okay? Let's do a little fact-checking of the New York Times. What I'm going to do is I am going to go to Amazon.com and I'm going to put in Greenland global warming maps or something like that. And in a few minutes, the following book is going to come back. Arctic Riviera, published in 1957 by Ernst Hofer. Ernst Hofer was an aerial photographer who did mapping surveys for the expeditions that would go to Greenland. And he published this book because he thought it was really kind of warm there. Remember, it's at the end of the warm period. And in Arctic Riviera in 1957 is a map of northeast Greenland. Let me blow it up for you. See that? That says Carlsbad Fjord. See that? It's an island. Yes. Fact-checking so bad on this that 50 years ago it was an island, not 5,000 years ago. And yet, this is one of the main scare stories that exists on global warming. I'd like to say that scaring people to death on global warming is not bipartisan, but it is. And by the way, if John McCain had won the election in 2008, he would have cap and trade passed today. You do know that, because he was the sponsor of the original cap and trade bill. He would have gotten there in his inaugural speech and said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach across the aisle for meaningful climate legislation, which wouldn't mean anything anyway, and we will have this passed. So count your lucky stars that your friends that you disagree with voted the way they did. Well, anyway, so McCain tried to set himself out as the Green Republican. And I guarantee you that in 2012, Lindsey Graham or somebody like that will set themselves out as the Green Republican. And so he tried to get people in California to like him. You know, that's the name of the game in politics in this country, get people in California to like you. And so I shall close with the red Coya Pigot Turek comes bobbing along. You see, robins in the Arctic, a sign of unusual climate change. You've all seen this story. Here, the Inuit language for 10,000 years never had a word for robin, and now there are robins all over their villages. Who said that? Senator John McCain in 2004. Whoops, sorry, went the wrong way. Go forward one, please. There we go. This is the BBC, an authority on everything global warming. No word for robin, climate change in the Canadian Arctic. Okay, now, again, you could actually go online and find some books on it. I wonder who the staffer was that told McCain this, because it wasn't real long. You know, we live in a world where you can't say something without people fact-checking it, and it goes online. And so it wasn't real long, so I found out some interesting facts on this. There is a book published by an article in the journal Arctic, the same journal that had the picture of the water disappearing into the ice in Greenland, published in 1953 in the journal Arctic. The naming of birds by the Mammoth Eskimo. Robin is Coya Pigot Turek. Here's V. Stephenson. Have you ever read Stephenson? You've got to read My Life Among the Eskimo. He's an incredible guy. He lived there up there. There's also a book called Prisoners of the North, if you want to read a great book that features Stephenson as one of the people. And he had a dictionary, Cree-Tuyik, which I think is probably the same as that, Mackenzie Eskimo, that's northeastern Canada, and Shabwak, Alaskan Eskimo. So much for fact-checking on robins in the Arctic. But that's what happens on this issue. If you don't check the facts, if you don't look up the numbers, if you don't say, question the fact, most of the warming is a result of greenhouse gases. Wait a minute, what are all these independent articles doing in the scientific literature? If you don't do that, you're going to lose. If you do it, you're going to carry the day. And that's why the American people have become very, very skeptical about global warming, because these things are out there. They don't appear on CBS Nightly News or at CBS News, but they appear online and people know that they are true. So having said that, I'd like to thank you for having me come by, and I'd like to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Cheryl, are you going to pick up green cards or just...
If you have a question,
I don't
just
have a
ask
problem
it.
with somebody just yell out a question. Go ahead, sir.
Is this presentation going to be available electronically?
No, it breaks video cameras. But they have, if you want the PowerPoints, they're on your computer. And please use them.
Sir,
Yes.
what gets warmer and easier to measure, the land or the sea? When you're making a graph, when you're making a statistic, what is
Land warms more than the ocean. That's why we go to the beach in the summer.
Okay.
And
What are the chances of another ice age?
oh, another ice age is inevitable. Unfortunately, you and I aren't going to live long enough to see it. And actually, you could make the argument that ice age is defined as where there are large areas of land ice too far south in the northern hemisphere and too far north in the southern hemisphere. And Greenland is really an anomaly. Scotland looked like Greenland not that many thousands of years ago. Greenland, ultimately, the ice will come off of Greenland before the next ice age, maybe. During the last interglacial, about 150,000 years ago, there was still ice on Greenland, but not nearly as much as there is now. Yes?
If the ice core records show that global warming precedes
Right.
increases of CO2, not causing it, but following it,
Right.
why are we continuing this,
Okay.
this CO2 cause?
That's a very good question. Okay, we have these records from ice cores, and there are bubbles trapped in the ice core, and you can estimate the temperature from the ratio of oxygen to 18 oxygen 16 that's trapped in these bubbles, and you also can measure the carbon dioxide concentration that's trapped in these bubbles, and what you see is the temperature warms up before the carbon dioxide goes up. Be careful with this argument, because you can get killed making this argument. Here's why. When you warm up the atmosphere, just like if you warm up a can of soda, okay, pour some soda in it, and you'll notice that the carbon dioxide in the soda, the fizz begins to come out of it. So if you warm up the atmosphere, the fizz begins to come out of the ocean, and more carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is less soluble in the ocean, and therefore the CO2 goes up. If you warm it from changing the sun or for whatever reason. So the argument that CO2 increases follow the temperature increase in the ice core records is not dispositive of the hypothesis that CO2 would increase temperature. And then what happens, CO2 concentration increases some, the temperature goes up a little bit more. Here's where your argument works. Then the temperature stops rising. So there's no runaway greenhouse effect. In other words, you warm it up, more CO2 goes in the air. That doesn't mean more and more CO2 goes in the air. That doesn't mean all the methane comes out of the northern latitudes, because we never see the runaway greenhouse effect in the temperatures. So it's a sign that the Earth's climate is what we call metastable. It changes within broad limits. But be very, very careful of that argument. And I always get very queasy when I hear that. The other argument I get very queasy about is that the man-made flux of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is only about 3% of the total carbon dioxide load. That's true. But the other stuff is in equilibrium. You're adding increasing CO2, and it takes time for those wonderful plants that we all like to take that CO2 out of the air, decompose, and bury it in the ground. So that little disequilibrium does result in increased concentration in CO2.